Hi, everyone, and welcome to the RavenCast. I am your host, Adam Erickson, and I am here with my good friend, Matthew Distefano. Matt, how's it going today?
Oh, it's going well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us. This is
Yeah.
our first RavenCast with a live audience. There are people in the chat room, and I want to thank them for being here too. And if anyone has any questions or comments for us, you can type them in the chat room over there on the left-hand side. So this is going to be a lot of fun juggling chat rooms and questioning Matt on his book, which is called All Set Free: How God is Revealed in Jesus and Why That Is Really Good News. Matt, do you have a book with you?
Yeah,
I would.
it's blurry because my webcam kind of stinks, but there it is.
Oh, it's awesome. I love the cover.
It's nice and thin. You shouldn't have a problem getting through it.
Yes. It's awesome. I love it. Well, it's a fantastic book, and part of it is on what we do here at Raven. I also want to mention that Matt is a writer at the Raven Foundation, and what we do a lot of at Raven is explore mimetic theory. And just to give people who are listening in a very brief introduction to mimetic theory, a lot of people say it's a theory of envy, of desire, and what Rene Girard says, who's the father of mimetic theory, is that we desire what other people's have or what we think that they have. They may or may not have it, but we desire according to the desires of another. And just a quick example of this, Matt, you have tattoos, and I
I
don't
do.
have any.
Yes.
I
Oh,
am. They are beautiful tattoos, and I am feeling a lot of mimetic envy for them right now. And I was wondering, just as a fun way of introducing you, if you could tell us about maybe your favorite tattoo, so that I could have even more desire for a tattoo and maybe go out this afternoon and get one.
okay. Well, you can't see it, but well, you might be able to. I've got a my grandfather's old '57 Thunderbird here, and it kind of represents my grandfather and grandmother, who were like a second parents for me. And so
Yeah.
I got that. I have an old school microphone up here, which I really like. You can't really see it, but that just gives you reason to come hang out with me and look at my tattoos. I guess.
Good, awesome. Well, so this is your book touches is not more than touches on, but is guided a lot on mimetic theory. And I'm wondering if you can tell us how you were introduced to mimetic theory.
Through a long process of deconstructing previous theology and actually coming to a place, there's a story in Hebrew scriptures of it was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. It was, well, there's two of them. There's Onan, who spilled his seed, and
Uh-huh.
God smote him, and then there's the guy who holds up the Ark of the Covenant as it's falling over. And
Mhm.
so I came to a place in my own kind of progression and deconstructing theology and looking at ethics and if there's a God, what would he or she be like? Um, and those were kind of the things where I kind of just distanced myself from the Bible and was like, if so that kind of but mimetic theory kind of brought me in because I was looking for a way for I humanity to live peacefully and what Jesus' ethics were like and all this stuff. So I came to a place where I was like, well, God seems really immoral in the way that I knew how, in the way that what was that? In the way that he was described to me in a conservative way. Um, so then mimetic theory, once I discovered that, I don't remember the exact day or what my first introduction to it was. I don't even think it was Girard. It may have been something Michael Hardin wrote, and I don't even know how I stumbled upon it. Uh,
Mm.
but it was a way to explain um, the divine in a different way than what I was used to. And so before that, I had gotten into political philosophy and ethics and all these things, and it just seemed that um, what humanity in all of our brokenness, it seems like we were better than God, or like our ethics were better than that God, as I understood it at the time. So mimetic theory helped explain that how there's, in throughout Scripture, there's revelation, and then there's religion, and that it's not always so cut and dried. Um, so that kind of brought me back into and um, actually having a great appreciation for the Scriptures, and swallowed that red pill, and then there you go.
Wow. Yeah, you say it's a greater appreciation for the scriptures.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know how to handle the Scriptures growing up. It was kind of more like a just open it up, and what does the Bible speak? What is God speaking to me? And that didn't work for me, because I how was I supposed to know? God's killing all these people. How does that speak to me?
Mm.
I understood it.
Yeah, yeah. This progression that you're talking about is very common for people who are introduced to mimetic theory. There's like this shift that happens when especially when it comes to scripture and our understanding of who God is. Can you say a little bit more about your understanding of God, maybe when you were growing up,
Mhm.
and how that got shifted?
Yeah, my understanding of God growing up was this, um, it was this God. Everything God did was presupposed as moral, and so therefore, if God did something, that's God's morality was different than humanity's morality. So if God did something, that's because God can, but we don't do it because we're simply mortals. Um, where Jesus fit into that, looking back, I had a hard time reconciling, but that was how it was explained to me. It was that if God did it, it's moral, and then Jesus gives us what humans are supposed to do, but not necessarily how God would behave.
So
Does that
there's
does that make
yeah,
sense?
there's this distinction between God and Jesus.
Sure.
And
That's how I understood it. I
yeah,
mean,
and God can do whatever God wants because that's God.
sure.
Yeah. And Jesus, interestingly enough, Jesus in traditional Christianity um, is the one, and this is what I like about mimetic theory too, is the one who shows us who God is. But you're saying that there's kind of this dichotomy between the way God acts in scripture and the way that Jesus is, and it's hard to reconcile those two. Is that right?
Yeah, well, if you read the Bible flatly, or in a flat hermeneutic, or the only way I knew how to read it growing up, the only way that was presented to me, yes, then
Yeah.
there would be that split.
Yeah. It's some I know that your book All Set Free talks about atonement a lot.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I come in contact with, and it makes a lot of sense in where you're going, is this idea that Jesus on the cross saves us from God.
Hmm.
And so there's this distinction between who God is, like God is the angry father figure, and Jesus is the one who saves us from the wrath of God. But your book is trying to reinterpret all of theology and particularly the atonement.
Yeah, if we take Luther's insights and we begin at the cross, then the traditional atonement model would assume things about God before we meet Jesus, before we get to the cross. So we would carry a theology to the cross, and then fit the cross into a presupposed theology, as I would understand it.
Mhm.
Um, and I just don't. What's what's really the point of Jesus, other than, I mean, saving us from an angry God? Um, I don't know. I don't know how that reveals God, other than through what we did to Jesus. That would reveal the wrath of God, I suppose. But is that really is that really what the point was? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. What do you think really is the point of the cross?
Well, I think it's twofold. It reveals God throughout. So before the cross, leading up to it, we're in the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus could unleash these legions of angels, and he doesn't. And then on the cross, he's forgiving the entire time, not not requesting something from his father that his father's just like, no, I'm not forgiving them, So, and then after the cross, revealing peace at the end. The first word out of his mouth in John 20 is shalom. So he's revealing the Father, but he's also our model as well.
Mm.
So if we're going to follow Jesus, um, sometimes it's very scary, but we may end up at the cross, so to speak, and
Yeah.
that's the way. And so that is our model, and the Father is Jesus's model, and so it's this. I see wonderful relational thing rather than Jesus appeases this portion of God, but he also reveals a portion, the loving portion of God, but then takes on the wrathful portion of God. And then I just don't understand how that works. Experientially, I don't experience any of that.
Yeah, it's also very confusing to me.
Very confusing. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get into the title of your book, All Set Free. Um, what are we set free from?
We are set free. That's a great question. Um, I don't think we're set free from eternal conscious torment. I'll say that. I don't think so. I think we're set when the short answer would be that we're set free to love as Jesus loved and to love as the Father loves us. And we're also set free from this mimetic entanglement. If we follow Jesus in the way of Jesus, um, we will not be caught up in this mimetic rivalry. I mean, we will because we're human and um, we have that, what is that, the Yetzer Hara, that evil impulse. So we will still, um, and but Jesus would hope that way would help us be free to love as he loves us and to be free to not, like it or not, you're going to want my tattoos because I have them, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we're going to get in this, but I mean, we do it all the time. And none of us are free from that. Just we'll never get away from desiring what each other desires. But to desire what Jesus desired, which was only to desire what the Father desired, that's what sets us free, and free to love, and free to, um, when we die to that selfishness, that putting ourselves above the other, that's when we find true freedom, um, to be who we are in God's image.
Mm. I'm reminded of the passage where Jesus says scandals are bound to happen. You're going to find yourselves in these scandalous rivalries with one another. And I think there's that passage where James and John, the sons of thunder, come up to Jesus and they say, what is it they say? Who will sit at your right hand? Which one of us is going to do it? And there's this like rivalry among the two of them, but among the disciples in particular on who is going to be Jesus's right hand man. And
Mm-hmm.
it seems as though we constantly, as you're saying, fall into this pattern of rivalry. How say more about how Jesus might help us manage those rivalries better, how he sets us free from them in order to love.
Mm. How does Jesus set us free from that?
Yeah, because it's a
Well,
trap that, as you say, we constantly find ourselves falling into. Um, and does Jesus set us free from them? How do we manage them in healthier Christ-like ways? I suppose.
oh well, I mean, goodness, not through just teaching, but in his action. I mean, as if we can learn just by teaching. We can't. I mean, I mean, if it was just about teaching, he would have came and taught and just probably beamed up, right? But so through his action, and I think taking serious, um, well, the way the early Christians formed their community, I think there's a there's something missing in Christianity, and that is community of um, kind of climbing down the ladder while everyone's climbing up the ladder to get to the top. Um, and so I think there's this big when the apostles just sell all their stuff and just basically share everything. That's for me that was missing in my Christianity, and this whole like lifting each other up in the way that there's the where Jesus says that we don't lord it over the others like the Gentiles, but we came to serve, and those who serve are first, and those who take are last. Or I forget that's the Matt's paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in gosh, it's a constant walk with Jesus. It's not. It's so hard to just say, okay, I understand what he's teaching, I understand what he's saying, but to put it into practice. And so we have these 3 years of his life, and then we have the first and second century Christians who should be sort of our model in how to just give freely. I should just be able to say that there's not Matt Distefano and Adam Erickson. I'm just going to give myself for Adam Erickson and X, Y, and Z, all these people. I don't know if that it's a very complicated way of. I mean, it's hard. It's a day-to-day relational walk with each other and take up our crosses and each other's crosses and walk together in community. And I think Jesus really taught us how to do that in his action and also in his lesson as well.
Yeah, it Jesus highlights the greatest commandments is love God and love your neighbor as
Yeah.
you love yourself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the balances, the tricky balances in this is you can give yourself to your neighbor
Mm-hmm.
by loving your neighbor, but oftentimes you can be so caught up in self-sacrifice that you forget to love yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And that I guess that would take it, there's this probably gray, everything's there's nothing really black and white. So we have this society where it's me, and you could take it, overcorrect where you don't love yourself, and in not loving yourself, you're not loving someone that someone else loves. And then
Mm-hmm.
so how can you be loving your neighbor when you don't love someone that your neighbor loves, which is yourself? So
Right.
that's kind of the overcorrect, which
Yeah.
most of us probably struggle with the selfish one. But yeah, I could definitely see where if you forget to love yourself, you're not loving someone that is made in God's image. You're not loving someone, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Because you are made in God's image.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you love yourself so that you can go out into the world and love others too? A lot of people, I think this is important, I think, because a lot of people start feeling overwhelmed by all of the problems in our families, in our neighborhoods, and in the world in general. And how do you do self care, self love when you start feeling that
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming? It's part of our friend Lindsay at Raven recently wrote an article on joy and how do you find joy amidst all the problems of the world. And this may be one of the ways to do it is to remind yourself, God says love your neighbor, yeah, but also love yourself
Mm-hmm.
and find joy in yourself and in the love of God,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I like that.
And love your neighbor as yourself. So it's not you're not putting even yourself or your neighbor above.
Mhm.
It's not love your neighbor over yourself. It's the same, So
Yeah.
that can be very difficult. I find myself struggling with finding this inner joy and this inner peace amidst my Facebook feed that blows up with, you know, doctors, doctors' facilities being blown up and war. I mean, it's hard to balance that, um, have that joy when it's just constant. But yeah, that
Yeah.
was by
Well, which is going to lead me into the subtitle of your book, How God is Revealed in Jesus and Why That is Really Good News. It's hard to find the good news when hospitals are being bombed, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. That's true. Yeah, I just feel like the message that, with the subtitle, the message that I was always told is that I don't know, even if it's good news for me, I just don't know
Hmm.
how the traditional, I guess, Western understanding of of the gospel is actually good news. I mean, if I find it, if I'm autonomous and I'm selfish and I'm personally saved, quote unquote, then sure, you could call it good news, I suppose. But it's not good news if if everyone's not included, because I don't understand the self as autonomous any longer. Um,
Say
so I,
more about say more about that. The self as autonomous.
oh, okay. I don't. When I got into political philosophy, I got into Ayn Rand and this whole like self ownership thing, where
Okay.
I'm a self owned individual, and that's how I would define myself. And when I discovered Girard and the term interdividual, that we are our relationship and we are um, all these things, I don't see myself as just this like this Matt. I'm not just Matt in this shell of a thing that I can just live and function on my own. Um, so there's this good news of someone being lost. But if someone's being lost, then that's a part of me because I've impacted that person. They've impacted me relationally, and all the way down the line to all these people. Um, I mean, we could get into what is the self, and sorry, I lost my train of thought. It
No,
happens.
that's good. But what brought me down that road was you were talking about you were getting at salvation.
Mm,
If some people aren't saved, uh, your new understanding of what Rene Girard calls interdividuality as opposed to individuality has that brought you to a point where are you a universal salvation? Do you believe in universal salvation because of this, or
well, I actually became a quote unquote. Yeah, I believed in universal salvation before I discovered Girard. Actually, um, so so mimetic theory actually just strengthened my understanding of the self and what it means to be in relationship with others. Um, yeah, I don't understand salvation as personal because I can't. I mean, should my daughter be lost to me forever, I don't know what does my salvation look like? And we can talk about God making us ignorant to their existence, or even sicker, that we would worship him, like look down upon people that are burning and say that's some sort of that gives glory to God. I mean, there's people who take that stance, and I would disagree, but we can't experience those explanations of how we find heaven or salvation amidst billions of people being lost. I mean, we would then have to theorize that we would be ignorant to them, or that we would be fine in spite of like my daughter or my wife or anyone being lost. So this for me, like salvation, I understand it collectively. I mean, I don't. Um, I mean, I yes, yes. I mean, we have to have this relationship. We should be in relationship with God, and we experience that. But I just don't understand how I can have salvation apart from others, everyone else having salvation. Because I can't experience that. I mean, you can theorize it, but I can't say that I could experience my daughter being lost and still find happiness or joy.
mm.
I mean,
I love it. I love it. I love the point about your daughter, but I think that a lot of people will get that. But where people might stumble is, someone like Saddam Hussein
mm,
or Adolf Hitler
mhm.
or someone like that. Are you saying that your salvation is dependent upon their salvation too?
um, well, if we're saying that Adolf Hitler is this embodiment of evil, then we're also saying he's not made in God's image. I mean,
Mm,
if 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 he if someone's made in God's image, I mean, I'm to love them. So someone that I'm called to love and to walk 2 miles and to give him my coat and to let him slap me in the face and still show him love. Um, should they be lost? I mean, something that I'm called to love, not just theoretically, but actually, is lost forever, then I would say sure. And there's I mean, philosopher Thomas Talbot points out that I think it's Manson's mother. I mean, this man commits all these horrible crimes, but it's still the son to a mother, and that doesn't take away the fact that this person is loved, no matter how much of a monster they are, no matter how much we disagree with their actions. But they're still loved. They're still made in God's image, and they're still, um, John. The prologue of John says everything is made for Christ, and He's going to be first place in everything. And is the cross bigger than Adolf Hitler and Pol Pot and Charles Manson and people we would say are evil and they've done evil things? I would just then say that the cross is bigger or covers more. So yeah, there would be a disconnect between my daughter, my wife, and then an Adolf Hitler, who we can all say is really evil. But if we want to talk about Hitler, we can say Hitler was motivated by the United States foreign policy, or the way we treated the Native Americans. And so then we can get back into individualism in that we all have an influence on each other. So people who do evil things may be influenced by Matt Distefano and Adam Erickson. And that's kind of, I've done some pretty bad things, and maybe that was the only Christ they've ever seen. And then you know what I mean?
No, yeah, no, I think it's such an important point, Matthew, and Lisa Stevens is backing you up on it. I think it's a vital point because Hitler grew up in a situation in Germany, came to power in a situation in Germany where the United States and others blamed Germany for World War I and hit them with all kinds of economic sanctions, which just made it ripe for resentment. All of these, it's what Girard would call a sacrificial crisis. And when you're in a sacrificial crisis, you need an outlet, and that's the outlet of a scapegoat. And tragically, that was minorities, particularly the Jews. But as you are brilliantly pointing out, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're responsible for it. There's, whenever you punish, as parents, we know whenever you punish, everybody loses in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, ISIS didn't just, pop up overnight. It's created by, among other things, a foreign policy of a Christian nation, and I'm not just going to I'm not going to scapegoat the United States of America and demonize what we do. I'm just going to, let's be a little bit objective and say that these evil people and evil dictators don't just pop up overnight, and that you go to the book of Genesis and Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And we say, yeah, the implied answer is absolutely yes. And so, am I totally responsible for people who commit atrocious acts of violence? No, I'm not wholly responsible, and neither are you. But we all are responsible collectively. That sounds like socialism, which people are a little bit scared. All those kind of isms that people get scared of. It sounds like this collectivism and all this stuff. And well, to a point, yes. I mean, I'm responsible for my relationships and people that I talk to and influence, and I'm responsible for my daughter and my wife, and they're responsible for me. That doesn't just take all the responsibility off of me or Hitler, but it just says that it's not as cut and dried as we like to always say it is or think it is.
Yeah. Michelle writes in the chat room, exactly. It is what we accept as the norm that allows those kinds of things to happen. And I really appreciate that comment, Michelle, because one of the things that I want to bring up, what mimetic theory helps me understand kind of on a larger level, is how culture gets caught up in the scapegoating process. It can become to be seen as the norm. it's just kind of what humans do. We scapegoat,
Mhm.
and we see this throughout history. But at the same level, and I see this inside of myself a lot, there can be um, a tendency to even scapegoat culture for this tendency to scapegoat, and that allows me to not take, is what you're talking about, Matt, responsibility to be my brother's keeper.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
makes sense. Yeah. So it's kind of a way of me saying, oh, you know, our culture is just messed up. Look at those Republicans, or look at the Democrats.
Mhm.
They're all in rivalry with one another, and you can point that out in other people quite easily. But what mimetic theory and what Rene Girard keeps pointing out is it's inside of each and every one of us, and how do we take responsibility for that within ourselves?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I, I, I I talk about all the scapegoating stuff in mimetic theory all the time, and then I think, man, I really sometimes scapegoat I do scapegoat fundamentalists. I scapegoat inerrantists. I scapegoat. Um, it it's very revealing about, you know, our knowledge of mimetic theory doesn't just say all you guys out there are doing this. It's
Right.
it says, well, I do it every single day. So
Yeah.
you know, you're a dad and I'm a dad, and I catch myself all the time, you know, with my daughter copying us, and it just keeps you. It's you have to remember it runs. I forget who makes the quote where good and evil runs down the middle of each and every one of us. It's true, but so does scapegoating, so does all this stuff.
Yeah. Michelle follows up with, "We all do scapegoat. It is a process to unlearn that reaction,
Mm.
unlearning how to scapegoat." I I love that. Do you have
Hmm.
any thoughts on unlearning how to scapegoat?
Um, it's a minute by minute awareness because I'm really good at it. It's so easy. I mean, I mean, even if you not even just scapegoating, just like, you know, my best friend wrote the foreword, and when we hang out, if he does something, I can feel this urge or this whatever to do what he's doing. Like if he squats down, I just like have this. Oh, I just want to. Or if he's fiddling, it's like so. It's this like perpetual state of awareness of when we get to scapegoating others. When we get to, it's just this. We have to be like preemptively in this mode of not doing that. Otherwise, we'll do it non-consciously, and then we'll look back and we'll say, "Oh, I just totally scapegoated that person," and that doesn't mean that they're not guilty of something. That just means that they're not guilty of what I think they're guilty of, which is
Mm-hmm.
everything, right? I'm
Yeah.
innocent; they're guilty. Yeah, it's to unlearn it is this. It's this dance, I guess. You know, you just you live in this mode um, of grace and forgiveness and empathy. Um, it just, I don't think you ever actually unlearn it, quote unquote. I think you always, because it's always a part of us. I think
Mm-hmm.
you get better at practicing not to do it, but it's
I,
hard.
this is I somebody I think it's Girard says that Christians are repentant scapegoaters.
Mm,
We're always repenting of the scapegoating that we find ourselves in.
yes.
But
Yeah.
one of the, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, which is just a constant state of changing your mind. I mean, not this Western understanding of I've repented of my sins and now I no, it's you're in this perpetual change of mind of I'm not gonna scapegoat.
But one of the difficult things about it is you were pointing out just a little bit ago that we can become blind to our scapegoating. It's this non-conscious thing that we do. And I'm reminded of the story of Saul during the process of his conversion, where like the what is it, the
The state.
scales fall from his eyes,
Uh-huh.
and it's such a great image of the scapegoater finding himself or herself in the pattern of scapegoating, and then the blindness kind of coming off.
Yeah,
Uh,
which is cool. The blindness comes off when Ananias calls him brother Saul. So when Ananias brings him into the community, that's when the scales fall off, and I think that's pretty cool. It's not, it's that Paul was brought in through the spirit of Ananias. I mean, Christ moving the spirit moving through Ananias, forgiving, saying, Saul didn't do anything to not be a persecutor. Ananias just called him brother Saul. And so it's like this, when we're in spite of our scapegoat. So as practicing, we're practicing as Christians to not scapegoat. That's in our practice. Then we can bring people back into the community who have been our enemies. That they've, you know what I mean. That's when the scales would fall off, when we start offering preemptive forgiveness and grace.
What a radical thing to do, because Saul isn't trusted uh, by many in the early Christian communities, and here comes this guy saying, "Brother,"
Mm-hmm.
and inviting him into this new kind of relationship. And you can't blame many of the other early Christians for not trusting him. I mean, here's this guy who's breathing threats of murder
Sure.
against the early Christian community. But this is what leads to transformation, this kind of brother transformation in this relationship.
Yeah.
Um, how would the world be so much different if today, instead of dropping bombs on those we call our persecutors, we would come to them in this early Christian spirit of brother and sister?
God, who knows? Can't be worse. No, in the last chapter, I try to talk about the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven, and that um, it's not a pipe dream. We're actually supposed to bring this about, and this is our model: is preemptive forgiveness and non-retribution. I can only hope that should this become the norm for Christians and non-Christians alike. I mean, it's not. This isn't a Christian thing, quote unquote. I mean, I think it was Lindsay or you that um, showed me that the before each book of the Quran, it's not a prayer but a hermeneutic, that mercy and grace. So it's not just a Christian thing, but how could I mean? I would imagine that it would look like the kingdom of heaven. Something. I mean, we would go toward. We're living in between these two ages. It would start to look more like um, the kingdom of heaven. Sure, there would still be violence, but um, violence always begets violence in some manner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of when Jesus says, "Those who live by the sword will die by the sword."
Mm-hmm.
And I was just reading this. I think it's Raymond Schwager who says that that is seen as the judgment of God. So if you're going to talk about God's judgment at
Mm-hmm.
all, it is in uh, allowing this human tendency to bring violence upon ourselves. And God says, if that's what you want to do, that will bring about this apocalyptic situation where you're just going to kill yourselves. And so it's this those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And you see this pattern throughout the Old Testament. You were talking about Cain and Abel earlier. And within what, 5 chapters after that, pretty soon you have the whole world is full of violence.
Yeah, I mean it's 6 generations, I think, before Lamech, and he's killing. A boy cuts him or hits him, and he's killing him, and uh, even though God puts a mark on Cain to stop the violence, and we're pretty good at just saying, yeah, well, we're gonna up the retribution, not only sevenfold, but Lamech says, well, forget sevenfold, 70-fold for Lamech. That's
Mm-hmm.
just, and that's just what that's very telling. I mean, right there in the first book of the Bible, you're just like, wow, this is telling a story of exactly how we do business, and it can get quite ugly quite quick.
It's
It's
very
very
truthful.
truthful.
I'm
I'm
noticing that I'm
noticing.
getting some feedback now, but that's okay. It's very, I think this is one of the things that the Bible, Hebrew scriptures, is so important in telling us the truth about ourselves and how violence just spirals out of control so fast.
Yeah.
Um, and the flood story is, from a Jardian perspective, really about the flood of violence that overcomes humanity.
Mm-hmm.
In the story itself, it says that the problem
Mm-hmm.
was violence.
Yeah, corruption and violence. He says it over and over, and that I think Michael Hardin, the one who told me that when a Hebrew writer says it twice like that, it's putting emphasis and if on the corruption and the violence. Um, I I could imagine what it would have been like back then. I would imagine it was probably pretty ugly.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but it's pretty ugly now, and we just keep going back to these same patterns as we've been
Sure,
talking about. So
sure. That's
yeah,
why it's still relevant. I mean, it's
that's
very
what.
relevant. I mean, you could read the first 11 books of Genesis and say, "Yep, this is pretty much what we continue to do today."
Hmm. Hmm. So where do you find hope that things can change?
Um, where do I find hope? I mean, there, there, there's something for me. I feel this isn't gonna be. This is just what I feel. I feel like there's an awakening towards um, this gospel, and I think we're every 500 years, like we go through this transformation in the church, and I think we're on this precipice of a reformation of sorts. And I'm excited that I mean, I think mimetic theory can go a long ways to help explain who we are as human beings,
Hmm.
and then also explain who God is by um, taking away all the things we project onto God and saying, well, that's actually you guys. And so it teaches us as much about God, in not directly, but indirectly by saying, well, all these things you projected onto God are actually yours. And so this is what's, where I think we can really start to see change in the world is this, what I would say is the true gospel, in that God has been forgiving the whole time. He's been loving the whole time. He's been merciful the whole time. Um, and if we could just accept that, I think we would start to. There's hope in that, and more people are waking up to that. I think,
Mm.
and more people I think are searching for this. They've been hurt by religion and the church, quote unquote, myself included. And I won't get into that, but and I've done hurting too. Like I said, I'm very good at scapegoating. I'm very good at vengeance.
Yeah.
I'm one of the best that I know, which is scary. But there's this um, there's this push towards, in spite of all the violence and in spite of all the madness that goes on, I feel like there's more and more people who are um, being drawn to God through the Spirit, and that's my hope.
My hope too.
Yeah, sooner than later, right?
Yeah. That is, yes, I think that's a lot of us in mimetic theory are hoping for that. And it's a beautiful way to state it and to sum up our conversation. And it is absolutely good news for all of us. So thank you, everybody, for listening in. Again, Matthew's book is All Set Free: How God is Revealed in Jesus and Why That is Really Good News. Um, Matthew, I forgot in my introduction to tell people about your website, which is
Oh,
called All Set Free.
yeah, if you go to allsetfree.squarespace.com, I would make it a .com, but Squarespace it's fine. So
Okay,
you can go there, and then you can get the book on whipandstock.com and amazon.com.
excellent, excellent. And Matthew is on Facebook and he tweets, so you can keep up with him there too. And Matthew, thank you so much for this conversation and introducing us to yourself and to your book.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it, and thank you for all that joined us. It was it was nice to have people chime in and take part, and it's nice to have great Facebook friends.
It is good. Awesome. Well, until next time, grace and peace be with you.
Thanks to you, my friend.